Well, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, good ever what time of day it happens to be that you are listening to the Tattoo Teacher podcast. On this episode, I have the amazing Shane Leaning. Now, if you haven't heard of Shane, you need to. If you haven't heard of Shane, you may have been hiding under a rock somewhere. Shane is an author, a podcast extraordinaire, is in the top echelon of podcasts in leadership. So if you haven't had a listen to his, you need to make sure we get onto that, and that'll be links will be in the show notes. But you're also an organizational leader and trainer. So welcome to the show, Shane, and we'll get into all of those things.
Thank you for such a kind introduction, and what a privilege to be here with the Tattoo Teacher podcast. Wow, an honor.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Well, this afternoon for both of us, really. Even though you're on the other side of the world, you're only 2 hours behind. So
amazing. Hey, yeah.
But it does make life a little bit easier for us. So I appreciate your time.
Well, I appreciate being here, and I do appreciate being on someone who is a similar time zone, because most of my chats online are with people in the UK or even worse, the US, which from where I am in Shanghai, China, always involves a late night my side.
Yeah, I've got to reorganize a calendar for North America. England's not like Great Britain's not too bad for me, but anywhere in North America, it's always a challenge. So. But Shane, thanks for joining me today. Now, I listed off a whole range of things that you do, but firstly, let's get into an organizational leader. Now, how does one lead organization? Yeah. Like, do you train organizers? Do you train organizations? Are you a consultant? Do you within education, so many people just they go in, they watch, they say a bunch of stuff, and they disappear. Or do you work with schools on a long-term basis? What does that term actually mean?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. So yeah, how I would usually describe myself as an organizational coach, and that kind of positions me. If we were to think of support that schools might get, you might put it on a spectrum from consultants who go into a school, they've got an expertise, and they're going to say, look, I've got the expertise, listen to me, this is maybe how you should do it, and let's work on the way I've had success in the past to help you, be the best you can be. Now, if we go to the other end where I sit, and there's not really many of us in the education sector. In fact, when I did my training as an organizational development coach, my whole cohort, this was like a year-long program, were all from the business world, not from the education world. But organizational coaching is quite different. This is saying, I go work with the school, and what I'm not doing is saying I'm an expert in your school or in how specifically change will happen in your setting. But what I am able to offer you are two things: an expertise in change, in how change works and what change looks like, but mostly a coaching lens, so that I can work with you as an organization, not just with a leader, but with your leaders, with your parents, with your teachers, with your support staff, to get together to help you do a bit of your best thinking so you can unlock that next change for yourself. Because for me, I believe passionately that we outsource far too much from schools, and that schools are these great communities filled with incredible expertise. And I'm not just meaning the teachers and leaders, I mean even the parents, like, who are one of the least leveraged expertise in schools, and the students and the different people, the staff that work in a school. Together, if there is good space given and good questions asked, I have seen schools do incredible things. And some of the best schools in the world, and I've been lucky to speak to many on my own podcast, for example, they follow a similar pattern. They know themselves so well, and they lead for themselves under that mission. So I see it as a responsibility of people working outside to help schools to figure that out for themselves. That's kind of where organizational coaching sits. And we use a lot of different techniques and approaches to kind of make that happen.
Yeah. Well, that I mean, that explains it a lot better for me, in the sense that it's you're not trying to say, oh, here's how you should change. You're just going, here's how change happens. Here's where I see maybe some change could benefit you. But it's more of a dialogue with the school about the best way to be the best for that particular ecosystem.
Yes, exactly. So I would say that when I'm working with a school, they might say, Shane, we're having a particular challenge with with reading, and our students aren't achieving well in reading, so we want to solve that problem. And I would be coming in saying, okay, well, what I'm not going to be able to offer you is a full expertise in reading. I'm not going to come in as a consultant and say, do this program, do this. But what I can do is ask you some questions that are going to help you think. So I might say, okay, you think you've got a challenge with reading. Explain why. Like, why is that challenge? And if I asked this teacher compared to that teacher at the other side of the school, would they have the same view on whether this is the challenge? If I asked a parent, would they have the same view? Can I help you to facilitate a conversation to bring some people together to work out what that challenge is, and help them through a series of questions to get to the point where they realize what their actual challenge is, and where we can break it down, and then I can help them go, okay, based on that, what expertise have you got inside the school that's going to help you? What expertise haven't you got inside of the school? Where might we go looking for that? How can we do a comparison? What's your culture like at your school in terms of appetite for change? So lots of questioning approaches that I work with schools so that they can help explore this change and feel confident to be making the right decisions with the right people.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, that it makes sense to do it that way. Because I mean, like you said, schools have so much expertise within them, like across parents, teachers, even students. Like some of these students nowadays have tremendous skill. The question I'm going to ask now is, and I usually ask it first, but I just wanted to get a sort of an umbrella of what you actually do and what organisational leadership and organisational coaching is. But my question generally is, why do you do these things? Like, what's your why behind it?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So there's a few whys for me in terms of what I do. But if I was to kind of go through my history as a school leader and then as a system level leader, what I found when I was interacting with schools was that the most success that I had was when schools were allowed to really lead from the front, lead for themselves with their community. And I was there as a support from the side rather than this kind of pushing approach. And I also believe, and it's something we've set out in our book, co-authored a book with Ephraim Lerner called Change Starts Here. I know Ephraim was on your podcast a good while ago. And we found that there's what we call a death of organizational confidence in schools, where schools are actually less confident than they ever were for many reasons. And one of these reasons we believe is that there's a lot of outsourcing of decision making in schools that are leading leaders and school communities to not feel confident. So I feel a huge passion to work with schools and to recognize that schools are amazing places full of wonderful professionals and so much knowledge. And I really struggle sometimes with the deficit conversations that can happen around teachers, around school leaders, be that online conversations, but even be that when I've worked with groups of schools. And I do a lot of my work now is with groups of schools where sometimes these group leaders who've got maybe 20 schools under their umbrella or 100 schools can have a bit of a deficit language around the way their principals make decisions or the way their teachers did this. And it can be so easy to have this kind of they don't know what they're doing approach. Rarely do I ever go into a school and truly feel that teachers or leaders don't know what they're doing. Often what's the challenge is that the organization has a complexity that hasn't been resolved, and there are tensions that are playing out within the setting that are meaning people can't perform at their best. So my why is really I'd like to see a bigger return to seeing the professionalism of teachers, and to see more autonomy and agency given to the professionals in our sector.
Yeah, it seems that, like, as someone who's been in education now for over 20 years, I've seen that shift. When I first, and I came into teaching late in the game. Like, I didn't start teaching until 2002. But over the years, there was, I don't know, it was in probably maybe in the mid 2000s, 2010, 2012, around that time, where I feel that there was quite a big shift away from seeing teachers as professionals.
Yeah.
That just and then where it came from, who knows? Why it happened? Look, any number of reasons. But I'm seeing it more and more in the media today. It's quite interesting. It's got the clickbait, news stories, and which I always like to I don't bother reading the story. I'll jump to the comments section and just to see what people are saying. And you've got a lot of, keyboard warriors who are saying, teachers are just glorified babysitters. What are they doing? And I mean, my first thought is, well, you went to school. You know what teachers actually do. You've got the ability to do whatever you're doing in society because you moved through a system that helped you get to your next level of success. And I just see that, you talked about it, that there's those tensions within a school. And it's not that there's not the willingness and the drive to do what's right, but there's almost, and these are my words, but there's not a clear direction that they're allowed to go in. Or if they do make that decision, then they're almost chopped out at the knees because they've taken that risk.
Yeah, I like the way you've framed that, and I think that's right. The way I see it is there's multiple pressures that have come from different places that have slowly made that shift, and I agree with you on the timeline of that. I think we've got, as you identified, maybe we've got pressure from parents who have a view of what teaching is, and therefore maybe there's pressure coming from that side on schools. And then if you were to kind of go the opposite of that, you've got governments who are increasingly interested in education, and it's always when, especially in liberal democracies where you have the change every 4 or 5 years, education's always on the cards for something. There's something that the new education secretary wants to do, right? And so they find these wins, and it puts another pressure. And usually it's hard to frame change on a political level to education in a way that doesn't damage the reputation of the professionals working in schools, because it inevitably leads to people feeling that schools aren't doing a good job, and therefore that means teachers and leaders are not doing a good job. But also, in addition to these external pressures, we've had something really interesting, which is this internal pressure within our sector that's happened, and it's come from a very good place, and that is that over the last 10 years or so, we have seen a real explosion in our understanding, or at least in the synthesis of cognitive science, in how we learn, how the brain learns, especially in how it learns and retains knowledge. And that's kind of a really clear distinction. That's kind of where a lot of the research is focused. So with all this research that's come up, that has again brought up ideas such as the idea of retrieval practice, for example, or the idea of interleaving or spacing, or these words that have come from cognitive science that sometimes are just labels of things teachers have already done and sometimes are articulated in a slightly different way. But either way, they're being pushed onto the sector. And really there is a narrative that has developed that teachers who taught prior to 10 years ago weren't teaching very good. And all of a sudden now we're teaching well. Well, this is hugely damaging to the professionalism of the sector. And I think it's become a bit of a perfect storm where teachers and leaders in schools have over time just become less confident to be able to teach and lead in the way that they feel is effective.
Yeah, and there's so many pressures on schools to perform. I mean, I know in England there's Ofsted. Over here in Australia, we have our various governing bodies for each state,
Yeah.
and then the overarching education, minister. But then, like you said, every 4 years there's a change, or even within that 4 years, the ministers might get reshuffled, and then there's another change, and it's like, what are we doing? The only sort of region, and correct me if I'm wrong, the only sort of region that I see currently that's really investing in education and placing a premium on teachers in both time, social status, in the sense of respect, are the like the Scandinavian countries, Norway, Finland, Sweden, where they see teachers as critical members of society,
Yeah.
and see real value. And there's no kicking education around. It's like, this is education.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they're not, I don't have much knowledge of those parts of the world other than what I read, but I can resonate with that on a local level for China, for example. I mean, even on the smallest level, one thing you will notice about coming to China if you're in education is the status of teacher in society is much higher than where I'm from in the UK. Is much higher, seen as a much more important integral part, and seen as a noble profession, which sometimes it is not given that kind of status, which is just so sad. And that leads to decisions being made. For example, if you were a teacher in Shanghai and teaching maths, it's not unusual for those teachers, their timetable, their actual teaching load, to maybe be around the 10 hours, 12 hours, 13 hours a week, maximum like contact time. And the rest of that time, their time devoted to good quality marking, good communications with parents, that they can get to know them better, to understand the children. Professional development days, like there are days local here where all the maths teachers, in a certain district of Shanghai get together once a week for an afternoon to do PD together every week. And these are symptoms of a society that has a different view on education, and maybe a more stable view on education.
Yeah, that makes yeah. I think stable is the key word. That
Mm.
there's your education is important. I mean, every system has its flaws and faults, and people are fallible, as we know.
Yeah,
Um,
100%.
you touched earlier on sort of the cognitive science of, obviously teachers back here weren't doing the right things, or they weren't teaching good enough.
Mm.
And then the teachers nowadays, we've got the labels, and we've got, so that obviously we are doing it. But then if you sort of look back, the teaching that was done, I'm even, as early as when I was in, as high school, which is not that long ago in comparison. I mean, they were good teachers. They knew their content in and out.
Yeah.
They were masters of their subjects. Now, did they have the fully understanding of brain plasticity and all that sort of stuff? Probably not. But they knew how to get information into kids, and they knew how to, that relationship was critical to a good education.
Yeah.
I mean, I know for me, my first priority in any class is building relationship with the student, because if I don't have relationship, I don't have trust, and if I don't have trust, then the student is not going to learn. So, in what you do, and with Ephraim as well, is trust a big thing? Is that like put in there to bring across the school body?
Yes. So In the work that Ephraim and I have done, we have worked on a change model, so that any school going through change can go through confidently. And, in a nutshell, it's based off a design thinking model, which you might be aware of in your field, but it's called the double diamond model, where you go
Yep.
through the double diamond. But at the very beginning of this double diamond, and the double diamond, for listeners, if you haven't come across it, it's a very simple. Imagine two diamonds next to each other. You go left to right, and it's a period of expanding your thoughts and then contracting your thoughts, expanding your thoughts, contracting. So in the design world, you would start with an idea, and you would go discover what could the challenge be, and then you would define the goal that you're trying to solve, and then you would develop a solution. You'd go wide. What could we do to solve it? And then you deliver that solution. You'd come to that. It's a lovely, beautiful, simple model. But what we've looked at is the human around that model. And at the very start, rather than just discovery, we say it's really important first to have connection, because it's all well when you're dealing with just a design, you might be able to go straight into discovery, especially if you're doing it on your own. But if you are trying to discover a problem and you haven't connected with your team, and to use a word used, you don't have the trust of the team, or people don't have trust in you, then regardless of the ideas that you discover that could be great ideas or great things to work on, it's not going to work. So trust, or psychological safety, at the start of any change is so important. And we put it right at the beginning as well, because our sector, sadly, is not the most psychologically safe sector to be in, just by some of the things we've discussed already. Like, as a teacher, that is a deeply vulnerable position to be in right now as a teacher. Maybe all the expectations that are upon you, maybe even, this great research that you're supposed to really have in your head, the way you're supposed to teach, but then the way you're supposed to communicate with parents, deliver to your leaders, it's a deeply vulnerable place. So, the trust and the psychological safety, as Amy Edmondson so brilliantly talks about in her work, is absolutely the place we should be starting.
Yeah, I 100% agree about the psychological safety. Like, we and depending on where you are in the school and the leadership structure, some are more exposed than others, and they have to carry that. They have to carry that burden of knowing that this child is going home to a place that may not be safe. They're going home to possibly, no food, no electricity, or they have, as many teenagers do, are struggling with self-worth,
Yes.
just their self-esteem issues, and then there's unfortunately there's suicidal ideations, and then you add other issues in it, and then all of a sudden these teachers they're trying to fill in the curriculum that is just getting more and more loaded. They're trying to do the best job with some of them up to 30 kids in a classroom, 30 students who are very different in a classroom. And then they find out about this. And then if you're a leader, then you know that, one of your teachers has just lost their parent, or they've just been diagnosed with cancer, or, their dog has just, died that morning, but it's too late to call in a replacement. So they've come to work. And so it's just like, there's so much going on that how does effective teaching actually happen? And it's all those sort of things. So it's building trust, building relationship, and building safety is that something that schools speak to you about, how they could also do that to help protect their staff?
Yes, I think that's one of the biggest areas that I work with schools on, if I was to look at, and that's because the way I see it, if you're a leader, and I mainly work with leaders who are working with their teams. So if you're a leader, you've got a team in front of you. Now, you might have some of the best ideas in the world, but the reality of any team is that they're a team currently in 2025 made of human beings, right? So they're a human team, and humans are just naturally diverse and incredibly diverse in both, not just how we've come into education, but in our family backgrounds, in what's happening in our personal life, in where we've come from, in terms of our past traumas, in terms of how psychologically safe we feel in society and in school and in the home, and in terms of the ideas that we bring. And therefore, this makes any change you're trying to do all about relationships, and it's deeply relational work. You can't separate that to it. So I squirm a little bit sometimes when we get too obsessed with models or frameworks and following a framework when we're dealing with a group of human beings, because naturally the complexity will come out and it will break out of your perfect framework, and it will cause you problems. I have rarely seen a school who created a school development plan that they just ticked off as they went through. And when I have seen that, when they've done that, I've thought, really, were you actually changing anything, or were you just tracking what you knew was happening? Mostly, they agree ideas. This is the time of year as well, in the northern hemisphere where it's the start of the year, so people are all these leaders are going to have great ideas and going in and, okay, let's do this, let's do that. This year's going to be the best year ever. And then something will happen in November. And then then three things will happen over the Christmas break. And then all these different things. And slowly it will unravel. And the leaders who are successful, the schools who are successful, are the ones who have built up that level of safety and trust, so that they know failure is going to be part of this process, and they know we're going to have wobbles, and we are building muscles to deal with that as we go, rather than thinking we've got a plan. What usually happens, the plan goes wrong, something gets in it, and we just drop the plan entirely, or we just we mutate the plan, and that it's not, and we barely give it time to reflect on whether that's even going to work. So I think that agility and those organizations that are able to communicate well with each other and vulnerably with each other are the ones that actually have more secure change in the long run.
Yeah. So and with that, to go back to the double diamond, so with our divergent convergent thinking,
yes.
Do you find that the schools that accept, like leaders who accept that staff want to take a risk and are happy to fail, that their ideas for change are actually often, they're well creative, and they're happy to explore that and then tape it down to what's going to bring positive change to the school, and then explore, okay, how are we going to do that? So we bring in all our crazy ideas, we bring it down to 2 or 3, then we explore those, and then we bring it down to the 1. So with the leaders that make their staff feel safe, do you find that change is not only more effective but more rapid?
Yes, on both, I would say. And that's the beauty of the double diamond. It's one reason we settled on it. Like, I don't know why more haven't used design thinking when coming into change, because it's a really helpful model. It's a model I'm very familiar with as a coach. As coaches, when I'm working with a leader, I often be asking them to expand their thinking first and think of possibilities before we define. Doing that with a team is very useful. It not only allows for ideas exploration, but as you hinted at there, it actually allows teams to build trust with each other, that all ideas are welcome, and that we are willing to explore. It doesn't mean we're not going to converge our thinking and come to a decision together, but that we're willing to go wide. And the beauty of it being a double diamond, and this is the really important thing about this model, is the very first diamond, you are just working towards aligning a goal to try to figure out what you want to do. The first diamond is not even designing the solution. And often we just think we've got a challenge and we'll then try, what could we do to solve this? When you might realize that a lot of your team aren't even aligned behind the goal that you've chosen. And therefore they might be coming up with solutions for you, but they don't even really believe in what you're trying to change. So the double diamond slows you down a bit. It allows you, in the first diamond, let's just focus on discovering what our challenge could be, and then defining a goal. And then let's leave it to the second diamond about developing and delivering that solution together. And guaranteed, when you do that first diamond well, that second diamond, when you come to implementing, is much easier. And it's much easier due to one reason mainly, and that's that you don't have to develop buy-in to change, which is something we hear about a lot in education. How do you generate buy-in, generate buy-in? Often if you're having to generate buy-in, you haven't done any work in alignment around the goal in the first place. And that makes it a very difficult place to start to get people bought in.
Yeah, because you hear the term, get on the bus, and it's just like, well, if you don't get on the bus, that's it. You're going to fall behind, and and I know that can be with people, as you know, it can be quite frightening to take that risk, to go, hey, I'm not really sure, but I don't want to get on the bus just yet because I don't know enough about the bus.
Exactly.
How far is it going? Is it going to stop? And then there's those teachers who go, oh, okay, I better get on the bus because I don't want to miss out. And then they get one foot on the bus and get caught in the door, and then they're caught in two worlds of uncertainty, and it just makes it even harder.
Can I say, I've said this a few times sometimes, and it's a bit controversial to some, but this is why I am deeply worried about what's happening with AI in education at the minute. I'm deeply worried. And I know it. And people, as soon as I say that, people go, Shane, get on the bus. The bus is moving. If you're not on the bus, fine. And I go, well, one, I'm on the bus. I use AI every day to help me in different tasks. I'm kind of going with that. What I'm worried about is if we were to think about the double diamond, there is so many solutions being created at the minute to problems we haven't even investigated. And this deeply worries me in an area, especially in education, where teachers and leaders and educators are less empowered than ever. And a lot of the power balance is held by tech companies like Google and like these people. And where I think we are at a time where we need educators to be in the driving seat, developing all these solutions before we've clearly connected, discovered, defined and aligned around our goals in education is deeply dangerous work, because I think we are developing a product system based on a market economy rather than based on what we're wanting from education. And this really, really worries me.
Yeah, look, I'm very much like you say, I use AI every day. It's on all my devices. I even have a pair of the Meta glasses.
Cool.
So and I'm using all these tools, but I'm using them in a very cautious way. Most of the AI I use is not student facing, if any. And the stuff that I do use that's student facing, it's very minimal. And it's used it's not just an open slather. And there's a number of educators, here in Australia and around the globe as well, who do similar things. It's like, we need to teach our students how to use this new tool, because that's what it is. And it's going to be very helpful, and it is changing parts of education, some for the better, some we'll find out in 5 or 10 years what that impacts will have, much like social media. But it's a thing where we need to be cautious, because we are shaping young people's lives.
Yes.
We want them to be critical thinkers. We want them to have independent thought. We want them to have creative thought. And to just offload, like I've heard, that some people are teachers that just going, yeah, put it into this, or use, I'm not going to name any companies, and even some anecdotal stuff that's coming out now is that it's not working for them. It's the students aren't actually learning. Yes, they're getting through stuff and they're covering a lot of information, but they're not holding on to it.
Yes.
It's just disappearing. Yes. It's almost the teach to test method. Okay, let's just get through this outcome. That's done. Forget it. Let's move on. And look, it's an amazing tool, and just as the calculator was an amazing tool when it was pushed out, and so many math teachers didn't want it because it was going to make students, less capable. But what we found out, because it was introduced carefully and it was done in moderation and not by tech companies, or where it was very much. I mean, obviously they wanted to sell product, but not to the extent that it's happening now. That now what a student is doing in year 9 is maybe what they were doing in year 7 10 years ago.
Yes.
Because they've learned the foundation, they've learned the building block, and then now they have the tool to actually understand the principles and move forward. So I think I got the year groups mixed up. So it might have been what they're doing in year 7 now, what they were doing in year 9 earlier. But the tool has been brought in slowly, and the foundations of the mathematical principles are still being taught.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I think that's a really good way to put it. And I think it's the same for teachers. Like, if I was to think of my change process with what's happening in teaching, and let's just take a simple tool like a lesson planning tool. There's many AI lesson planning tools out there. And then you two things that I'm seeing happening. Many teachers may be outsourcing their thinking to an AI lesson planning tool. And it is all right for people out there to say, yeah, but teachers need to be in control and they need to input, and it's, garbage in, garbage out. And we know that. Yet when these tools are used without full knowledge, you do start outsourcing some of your thinking. And I have spoken to many teachers who have realized their teaching approach started to change because the AI had generated the lesson plan in a way that they would never teach before. And it's kind of changed what they're doing, and they're kind of feeling a bit unsure about that. Is my teaching any better, or is it am I just going with this, and am I losing anything that made my teaching me? But also, I am still yet to meet a teacher who has said to me, Shane, I've been using AI tools for the last 2 years and my life is demonstrably better or less stressful in any way. Like, maybe they say they've saved time in lesson planning, but none of them actually say that adds up to them feeling better, about their jobs. I just don't meet these teachers, and maybe they're out there and they're going to come after this podcast and tell us, and that's great. But certainly in many I speak to, and this is just for me, just an idea that where we just need to check, are we developing solutions before we understand the challenge we want to solve? I'm not sure we are.
Yeah, that's a definite tough one and I think it's a thing that many educators are struggling with, and I think a big and like I've run a lot of over the last couple of years. I've run PDs within the schools I work at, but also externally. I've helped teachers get some understanding of how it can help their teaching, in the sense of it can do some of the heavy lifting for you, but not to allow it to take over. And I know so many teachers and they're just like, I don't want to. It's changing, but they're just like, I don't want to. And I think that comes down to they've been beat up by so many ed tech companies over the years, where here's my new shiny thing, and then they blast it out, they push all this information, and then they disappear because the company's got their money, and then they move on to the next. Okay, how am I going to generate my next revenue source? And teachers are just tired.
Exactly. And that speaks to the fact that whenever you introduce something new, there is always a prior experience of the person you're introducing it to. And that is like really key change development, kind of a fundamental. And yeah, I was speaking yesterday to a school group, a big school group I'm working with. They've got, thousands and thousands of students across, hundreds of schools, and doing some work with their leaders. And I always ask about where the people who I'm going to be working with are at, what's the temperature of their organization. And they say the classic, well, Shane, you're going to have some people who are well into this and are going to welcome you with open arms. You're going to have some that are arms folded at the back going, who is this guy coming in to help us? Like, oh, he's just like the last guy. You're going to have people who've been there 20 years. You're going to have people who've just got there 1 year ago. You're going to have people who've just had a recent promotion. Some people who got demoted 5 years ago. You're going to have tensions within that group. You're going to have everyone vying for different status within the group. Like the everyone's bringing something to that change, and so you've got to, when you come into to support, or even just as a leader when you're supporting, you've got to really acknowledge that, and that takes a bit of humility on your part to say my solution or the idea that I've got in my head, and we can't help but have ideas in our head of what good looks like, and that's a good thing. But we have to have the humility to go, I might be wrong, or it might not work for everyone. Or I'm going to have to kind of get off my high horse and kind of do some digging around with this. And I think that's where, using our AI example, we've just got to be careful. Are the people who are developing AI solutions, how well connected are they to the lives of a teacher, for example? And they might be connected really well to the lives of a teacher in their particular context. Maybe they're a practicing teacher, but they're only a practicing teacher in one school. And how are they getting the input on that kind of general, the general vibe across lots of schools? You know, I speak in my work. I get to speak to a lot of providers who provide products or supports to school. It's really great to speak to so many wonderful minds. One thing that rarer provider will admit, but nearly every provider has, is that the implementation of their product in schools is always much lower than what they would market. Like, I have spoken to so many people who use a tool, a great tool in their school, for example, or a provider that provides a really well-researched tool. But unless the school is really invested in that tool, have a real good knowledge, have a real good safety to implement and mess with it and to really make it theirs, it's really difficult to convert that great tool into great practice in schools. And therefore, you might get distracted on websites by good feedback from those schools that are implementing really well. But it's always interesting to do a bit of digging and work out, well, how many schools that take on that product are not doing it so well? And you'd be surprised, it's a lot.
Yeah, I can. I could well imagine. I've been in schools that are using a product,
Yeah.
and it worked amazingly well in that school.
Yeah.
Gone to another school, same product, teachers can't stand it. They don't like it. We don't use that one. We look at this and we do this, and we put our stuff there, but we don't actually, in our day-to-day, we don't actually use it.
Exactly. So yeah. I actually had, Philip, I had one school I worked with where they were running a phonics program. So phonics, early reading in schools, to kind of break down the words and kind of learn early reading. And they had a phonics program that they were using. And the new leadership came in, a new reading leader for the school, and looked at that phonics program and evaluated it. It wasn't really the most rigorous program, and it wasn't very well resourced. And they'd found another program which was currently getting a lot of funding from the Department for Education in the UK. Everyone was talking about this was like the one, the best, the most rigorous. And so they came from a very good place of saying, we need to replace our phonics program with this. This has better evidence, like they make better progress on this, They brought it in, and the rejection by that school was horrific because the current teachers loved the way they taught phonics. They loved it. And it wasn't the perfect phonics program. I've looked at that phonics program. It didn't have all of the great things in there, but the teachers really, really enjoyed it. Bringing this new phonics program, no matter how rigorous it was, there was a bad taste in teachers' mouths. And these teachers actually, when they went through and they did this phonics program for 6 months, and they were just having an awful time with implementation. There were just so many problems, and nobody in the school was willing to problem solve. those problems because you don't really want to when you're not really invested in something, right? So you had this negative atmosphere. The next year they went back to their old phonics program. Things were were ticking over just fine, thanks. They did better on a less well-developed system that had genuine buy-in and engagement than something that was better with less engagement. And this always sticks in my mind, that kind of story, as to why the best, most well-researched thing isn't always the best thing for your school.
Yeah, 100%. Like that sort of, the current school I'm at, they just put out a big survey to parents, staff, students, and this one comment that I remember from, and it was put up in our staff briefing, that one student was saying they love the passion of the teacher. They like that's what helped them learn. And they go, even if it was just like a terrible PowerPoint, the teacher was just because it was information that they needed, but it was just the enthusiasm of the teacher to get that information across was the key thing.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the content as such, although it was important. It was how it was delivered, and that relational part of the classroom with the student, but also with the content. So the content might have not that great, but I love teaching history, or I love teaching math, or whatever it is. It's just, here it is.
Yes, exactly that. That's a perfect example. Like I did a podcast on my podcast a while ago where I just talked about the different reasons people join teaching, and that we need to understand that not every teacher is just in it for X, Y, and Z, that every teacher has a slightly different take on why they're in the profession. It's not, some teachers, they just love working with children. Some teachers, they love their subject so much that they want to kind of share it. Some teachers love the pedagogy. Some teachers really like that learning science and understanding what's changing in their students' brains, and they really like the kind of putting that together. Some teachers like working with adults. They actually like working with the students, but they really enjoy those adult relationships and working out strategies on how they support the students. Some like working with, there's just so many different reasons that you may be in teaching, and it's important to recognize that, because that means your different members of staff are going to have different motivations and different reactions to the changes in front of you. That subject specialist, if you give them a teach by numbers history curriculum when they're really passionate, but you say, no, you need to teach this knowledge in this way, that could really be a big turn off for them, because they've got that, they could just lose their passion in that.
Absolutely, and it makes a difference. Like passion for whatever it is you're doing, and I mean that's one of the reasons why I'm doing. I do this podcast as well, is to get some of those good news. The good news about why people are involved in education. Whether it's directly in the classroom, or if it's like yourself helping guide change in schools, or I've had people run their businesses to bring, they were teachers, but they found a niche, and then they want to get it to as many schools as they can. And so it's just, let's try and try and get some good news and the passion out there.
Yeah.
But speaking of passion, and you mentioned your podcast, and you shared it's quite popular now.
Yeah.
And so how did the passion for that podcast come about, or how did the podcast come about? And then do you think your passion is what is helping it become successful?
This is a good question. So my podcast is Education Leaders. Well, I've got a couple of podcasts. I also do a brilliant other show, Coaching Done Well, with my colleague Jim Thompson. But Education Leaders is a podcast I've had for a few years now, and currently on episode 130. And it started off while I was in one of my last jobs, and I just wanted to get to speak to more people who were innovating in education. I just, a passion project really, and we mentioned just before we hopped on the call, Philip, it's amazing to set up a podcast, because you just get to speak to all these people who you couldn't necessarily give an email and say, hey, can I borrow an hour of your time to chat? They'd probably be like, oh, I'm a bit busy, mate. I don't know who you are. But a podcast, people go, all right, yeah, I'll come on a pod. So you get to chat to these people. But for me, I was really interested in how busy leaders get new ideas, and especially in the international. Mine's a very international podcast. It started off very specifically for international schools. It's broadened since then, partly due to just I realized who was listening in and the success of the show. So we just broadened it out. But yeah, my feeling with it is we release it every week. It's conversations with different people, much like yourself. And in it, what I try to do is ask questions that are useful to someone who is in a leadership position and dealing with leadership challenges. So I'm not necessarily just speaking to leaders, but speaking to people across the sector and outside of the sector about what it means to lead well in the education sector. And it just seems to have resonated. I'd love to tell you what the secret is, but at some point, after about maybe 6 months, there just was a bit of a spike. And I think sometimes these things can take off. And eventually I think a lot of people started recommending it and maybe finding it useful. I think a podcast for me is great professional development because you can listen to it as you're doing something else. That's how I listen to podcasts. So I like the idea that a lot of people get in touch, and this is my podcast comes out on a Tuesday, and I know that they listen to it on their morning run on a Tuesday, and that's kind of become their routine, or on their drive to work, and people embed it into a routine, and I think that's been part of the success. Maybe the fact that I've been every week without a fail, not 1 week missed in the whole time, means that you can start to slot into people's lives in a little way, which is a kind of a weird thought. Do you find it a bit weird that people are just getting on with their business listening to your voice, Philip? It's a strange old feeling.
Yeah. Oh, it is strange, and to get people contact. And, I was recommended by another podcaster who said, "Hey Phil, you really should do one. You're a great conversationalist. I think you'd have fun doing it."
Yeah.
It took me about 18 months to actually finally get it off the ground. But it was like he goes, "Don't look at analytics." He goes, "Forget the analytics. Like, don't look about how many people download or tune in or whatever." He goes, "Because most of them are skewed anyway. Because there's that many." Like I listen to all my podcasts on, like, I think it's Castbox. But so it doesn't really show up on too many people unless they put it in their RSS feed. But that's just how I listen to it, only because I like the interface of it. But the one analytic I did look at, because I publish it through through Spotify, just because it's with what we record on, it shows all the countries that I'm listened in.
Wow.
And I'm just like, all of a sudden, Australia, England, okay, well, they were the first couple of audience, guests that I had. And then all of a sudden, Netherlands, Dominican Republic, China, Nicaragua. And I'm just like, wow, like, for someone, we're just, just a teacher having a conversation about teaching and about AI and about changes in education, about organisation, about so many different things. It's just like, wow, that's really cool that someone actually wants to listen, and I'm so grateful for it. I've I'm a little bit behind you with episodes. I'm about I'm only in the low 50s, but
incredible.
It's one of those things where it's fun to do, and it is PD. It's like, because you're able to bounce ideas and hear completely different viewpoints for what we're doing across the globe in education.
Exactly. And I think more schools should take advantage of using podcasts as part of their PD. Teachers are busy, leaders are busy, people in school are just so busy. And sometimes we just see PD as those like 1 day at the start of the year, 2 days at the start of the year, those service days in between every so often. And that's, you squeeze all your PD into that. And it's not really effective to do it in that way. Like, what you want to try and find is, do the people in your school have specific passions, and are there ways that they can engage with that? And just, I mean, I like reading. I've got my bookshelf in front of me, but I rarely have time to read in reality. So podcasts are that accessible way. I spoke with one school. I spoke to Cindy Adair, brilliant leader at Patana School in Bangkok. I spoke to her actually on the podcast over a year ago now. Maybe it was a couple of years ago. And she talked to me about what they were doing in their schools. They had this kind of little setup where they did these regular pizza and podcast sessions where people had been given a selection of podcasts to listen to. So like maybe as a team, you can select a few. Maybe one's got a leadership focus, one's got a this, select a few. People pick which podcast they want to listen to within a couple of weeks time frame. So whenever you got a sec, just tune into your podcast. And then we're going to use that little half an hour meeting that we have on the Monday afternoon to get into a group with people who listen to the same podcast as you and just chat about the ideas. And they've got pizza with it, because pizza and podcast just sounds like a wonderful combination. So I just loved that. I thought, what a lovely way to let people explore their own ideas in a low, needy way in terms of their time, but also then allow them to come together and geek out a little bit on something that interests them. I think that's great.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, like you said, it's something that can be slotted into a routine. Like I drive to work every morning, I have to drive home. Yeah. So I've got at least 30 minutes travel.
Yeah.
And depending on the podcast that I listen to, I might do it in a day, or I might listen to half in this morning and half the next morning, and have my afternoon podcast that I listen to, because my cognitive load is very low. So I want something that's easy to digest, that's light, and that I can just, get into my third space before I walk in my door, and, feel energized for my family when I get home. So,
yeah.
So from education to leadership, organizational leadership and coaching, to the podcast, was the book just a step in that, or has the book been on the back burner? Has it always been thought, oh geez, I'd actually love to put this down on paper? And how did you and Ephraim connect to co-author this book?
Yeah, well, it's a funny old story, really. Yeah, so the book is Change Starts Here. I always have it nearby now. A lot of the ideas that I spoke to you about earlier on in this chat, like about the challenge of autonomy and agency and the understanding of diverse communities, the complexity, that's kind of the idea behind the book, and was the impetus to get it going. And then we framed 40 questions in the book that help the reader to navigate some of this change. Not advice, not telling you should do this, but questions to open up potential possibility for you. So that was very important to us. And how it came about actually is Ephraim and I came from two prongs. And by the way, we wrote this book without having ever met each other in person. Like we met each other after we'd just finished writing the last chapter, and we met in the UK. But it came about because Ephraim and I were both talking online about two different things. I was talking about that challenge of leaders having little confidence, because leaders were the main ones I was interacting with. And I was worried about how leaders were able to make confident decisions with all this noise coming from around schools, from policies, from products, from consultants, for example, all around the schools. And trying to work out, how do we help leaders make a bit better, more confident decisions and confident change? And Ephraim Lerner, who was also talking online, but he was coming from a slightly different place. He was talking about leaders not leveraging their internal communities well enough, actually leveraging the community that makes up a school, the teachers, the support staff, the admin, the parents, the students, in order to make good quality change going forward. So when we kind of came together, Ephraim reached out to me and said, do you want to chat? And when we chatted, we just kind of clicked very quickly. We realized this is something that we should both talk about more. And we agreed initially, I think, to just, shall we jump in a call once a month? That ended up turning into like a weekly call that we're having. And before we know it, we were writing all these ideas down, because we had a lot of ideas. And And we set up a little organization called Work Collaborative just to start to generate some of these ideas. And before we knew it, we had ideas, and at some point we must have said, shall we turn this into a book? And the problem is that neither me nor Ephraim can remember when we decided to write this thing. It's so none of us can remember. It's like it's gone from our memories. So this book literally came out of an evolution. I remember spending long nights in this office where I am here, because with the time zone different, he's in London, I'm in Shanghai, China, so I stayed up either late, or Ephraim would get up super early in the morning before the school run, and we would just write, and just type together. And we had these kind of, if anyone's writing a book, like I'm not a very strong writer. Luckily we had each other to lean on. One thing I really struggle with is focus, and Ephraim is the same. Like focus, like is one of our challenges. So we had these just accountability meetings where we'd jump onto Zoom and we'd just say, okay, it's writing time, leave our camera on, and we just start writing our own little bits. And this is where the book came from. And we're pretty proud of it. It's the start of a conversation, at least.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'll put links to, obviously, to your website, which then has links to the various resellers of that. I'm yet to order it, so it's it's on there because it only just came out, didn't it?
Oh yeah, I don't blame you. Literally, it's just people are a bit surprised that it just come out because we've been talking about it for a while, and we did do a big pre-release a good few months ago. But yeah, at the time of recording, we only released it actually last week, so it's only been available to the public in that time.
Absolutely. Well, Shane, I appreciate your time and I value your time, and I know you lead you've got so much on your plate, and so I just want to thank you for sharing so much. And I reckon we could probably chat for another hour at least about all these things, but I do want to, I do appreciate your time. So it's been amazing to hear all those things. So organisational change and the book and the podcast, and look, I mean, for me, I recommend if anyone wants to do a podcast, they should just jump on there. Your first one's not going to be that good, but you will get better. You'll find your groove and you'll find your niche. And I remember hearing there was a guest on another podcast, and he goes, even if only one person listens, you've got the ability to impact one person's life. And if you can do that in this world these days, that's a pretty good thing.
I love that. I love the way you've put that. And I agree. Someone else said to me, like when I was, especially in the early days, and yeah, you shouldn't look at your metrics, but you have to imagine however many people have listened in. Imagine if you were speaking in a room with them, like directly to them. And then that reminds you that these are human beings in front of you, and that is a group of people, and you'd be pretty nervous or pretty chuffed if people came to listen to you, even if a group of 10 people, or even if you're lucky, a group of 100 people were all in a room listening to you at one point. Wow, that's pretty incredible.
It is pretty cool, isn't it? Yeah. So we are. I feel very honoured and very privileged that people actually take the time out of their day to actually hear our conversations. Yeah. So, just before I finish, and the scales, I'm pretty sure have definitely tipped to one side over the other. But being the Tattoo Teacher podcast, Shane, I need to ask you: do you have any tattoos?
I don't have a single tattoo. No, they terrify me actually a little bit. Not the process, but the change. My wife is desperate to get a tattoo, but just can't figure out what to commit to.
Yeah, look, it's a tough decision because once they're there, they're not necessarily there forever, but it's a lot more painful to get them removed than it is to keep. So.
Yeah, I love it.
So, Shane, again, I'll put this in the show notes, but if people want to find out more about what you do, purchase your book, get in contact with you to maybe work with their school, if there are any leaders of schools listening, what's the best way to do that?
So, yeah, there's a few. Thank you for asking. There's a few ways to find me. So you could go to my website, shaneLeaning.com. And my name is Shane Leaning. I was saying before, like a lot of people, when they just skim my name, they assume it says Shane Learning. Just because I'm in the education sector, I think it just naturally happens. So much so, Philip, that I was at so many conferences and had my ShaneLeaning.com up on the thing, and so many people saying to me, Shane, I can't find your website. It's not coming up. I typed it in, and they typed in ShaneLearning.com. Yeah, it's happened so many times that I bought the domain name ShaneLearning.com, and it just redirects to ShaneLeaning.com. So you can find me at either. But I'm also, as yourself, I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me there. I dabble a bit on Blue Sky as well. If you're in that part of the world.
Awesome. Well, I'll put all those links in our show notes. But Shane, it was such a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for taking the time, and good luck with the start of the new school year, with the joys and well, we'll just say joys that brings.
Thanks so much, Philip. What an absolute pleasure. This has been great.
Enjoy the rest of your evening, Shane. Thanks again for your time.
And you, thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to the Tattoo Teacher podcast. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and found it insightful. If you like what you heard, it would mean so much to me if you could either like, follow, and subscribe to whatever platform you are listening on. The music was by DJ Fruit Salad. Thanks again for listening. Stay cool. Be blessed.